Treasure is a video game developer that's quite interesting. In the company's around 20 years of actually making stuff, they've made some extremely well-loved and remembered games, and some hidden gems. They're not really known for making any particular genre or series, as they jump between platformers, shoot 'em ups, fighting games, beat 'em ups, and more. And even their most beloved series like Gunstar Heroes or Sin and Punishment have only gotten a couple of entries. They have games that were good enough to get published by both Nintendo and Sega, and even have some games for the arcade. The only thing Treasure is really known for is making really good games. Quality runs consistently through all their titles, and I could be mistaken, but it seems like they never really had any misses besides a couple of PS2 games. It's practically impossible to hate this company. They're actually laid out very differently to other game developers in that they don't really have rigid structures and don't really assign lead designers to games, although they do assign directors and stuff. It's kind of like what Valve says they do, except they actually do it, and they don't do it horribly. At least I hope not. Treasure doesn't really focus on sales, with the founder Masato Maegawa stating that they prefer to make what they want, rather than just what they think will sell. It's an admirable model for a game company. Even when they do make some licensed games, because, companies still do need money, they're generally seen as really good. And, in fact, they probably made the greatest licensed fast food game ever. That's a way bigger compliment than it sounds, okay? Anyways, I'd like to take a look at their games today, and what I'll cover will be the 6 games they released on the Sega Genesis system. Or Mega Drive, I guess I should say, since one is Japan exclusive. Yeah, no, I'm not calling it that. This may become a full series, but I'm not sure yet. I already have like 2 retrospective series, so I don't really want to know if I have a new one running at the same time, Plus, I don't know if I can actually access literally every game made by Treasure. So for now, just the first 6 games they released. Also, some of these did receive ports on other systems, like the Master System and Game Gear, but I won't talk about those since they weren't actually developed by Treasure themselves. So, let's start with their debut title released in 1993, Gunstar Heroes. Gunstar Heroes is a fantastic start for any company, and just a great game. It's a run and gun in the same way as something like Contra, and it is an absolute sugar rush of a game. The sheer volume of enemies, combined with the bright effects and backgrounds in most areas, means I can understand if this isn't the game for someone. But I think playing it is a great time, and you sort of put in a flow state. Except for maybe the bosses. I'll talk about them later. Although when I played, I kind of feel that crash too, since whenever I'm done, I end up thinking about it. And it's kind of hard to get used to the not constant stimulation from the game. Enemies come from all directions, making it complete chaos as you move around trying to shoot everything. What really makes the game special, however, is the movement options. You get a double jump, which is really fun to pull off, because you can dive and damage enemies as you go. You can even grapple soldiers, further making these sections really fun to go through. It also differentiates the game from other run and guns at the time. You can even mix and match gun combinations, which keeps the game fresh as your weapons shift up a lot on the fly, and you're constantly trying new stuff. It's pretty cool how each power-up can be combined together to get new ones as well, which makes it feel somehow even more chaotic. Oh, and in other games of that time, like Contra or Metal Slug, it only usually takes 1 to 3 hits to kill you. But here, your health bar is pretty sizable, and you can increase it by a lot. So, compared to other brutally crushing games of the time, Gunstar Heroes is quite forgiving. You even can have as many continues as you like, and each time you start at the same place. There are a lot of games where live system feel grandfathered in, and don't really have that much reason to really be there at all. Just look at how long it took the Mario games to not have them in the 3D entries, and everyone was so happy when they removed them in Super Mario Odyssey. That's an example of what I mean here. So it's pretty surprising that Gunstar Heroes recognized this in 1993, and it shows that the game has a lot of confidence in itself and in the level design. But that does not mean it's easy whatsoever, because some of the bosses in this game are brutal. bosses will actually probably take up a majority of the runtime, since they're a pretty big challenge. They're definitely manageable, though, and they normally only have a few attacks. The game even tells you what all their attacks are, so it's somewhat easy to see what they're about to use. Plus, you might be able to avoid some by just simply leaping at them, but if you do die to a boss, you often have to go back quite a bit, and are almost guaranteed to fight a couple of bosses before it. Later on, they kinda get ridiculous with it. There's even an entire level without any checkpoints, which really makes me reevaluate my take that this game is fair. I mean, in the start it is, but later it just gets ridiculous. The bosses are at least quite imaginative. They have amazing designs, and make use of the game and technology of the Genesis to do some crazy things. Shout out to the fact that they have this one level roll that's like a dice roll, kind of like King Dice's fight from Cuphead, except not fun, and at the end, you get to take revenge on the guy who sprung this horrid level on you by doing this. He even has this little tricky thing where he tosses a gem to you, which, by the way, whenever you defeat bosses, they throw them at you. Except, this one's actually a fake bomb one, and it actually caused me to die the first time. I was pretty glad to torture the bastard. Besides those minor issues that show up later on in the game, Gunstar Heroes is quite polished and feels fair. Two things you might not expect by seeing the chaos that is this game. But it's a perfect blend of that chaos and strategic gameplay, and it's relatively simple enough that Gunstar Heroes feels like a perfect first game for a company. Like, basically everyone who's played this game loves it, and I've seen many people consider it to be one of the best games on the Genesis, if not the best game on the Genesis. I had a lot of fun with it, and it's definitely in my top 3 Genesis games, for sure. I don't really think any other game Treasure made will really top it, but at least it'll be fun to see what the future will have in store. I'm not actually quite done with Gunstar Heroes yet, because I do want to talk about the story and the ending of the game. So it's a simple story for a simple game. You're a child soldier, single-handedly beating an evil empire, with this doctor guy helping you. Well, unless you're playing multiplayer, in which case you're 2 child soldiers beating an evil empire. Occasionally you do get little bits of insight into some characters' backstories. Hey, this character is your brother. Oh no, this one character has been kidnapped now. Although I have no idea why Gunstar Yellow actually needed to be a character. The ending, however, it tries to be something more. That brother of yours, Gunstar Green, he gets mind-controlled by the evil empire, and he was previously a boss before this. He makes amends for what he's done and sacrifices himself to destroy the entire empire. Now, I won't pretend this ending from a modern lens is anything but cute. Like, this guy just kind of showed up, said they were controlling him, and died, but I can't help but love it. And that bittersweet ending it gives this game, even if it feels a little bit unearned. Might I remind you, though, this was 1993, the mid-Genesis/SNES era, and not too far off from the time of congratulations, this story is happy end. The concept of a video game having an actual concrete plot with the beginning, middle, and end hasn't really been established yet, meaning this was actually great for the time, and, well, having a dramatic cool sacrifice at the end is always better than not having a dramatic cool sacrifice at the end. In many ways, Gunstar Heroes feels ahead of its time, and it was a pretty great playthrough for sure. So, let's take a look at the second game Treasure developed, McDonald's Treasureland Adventure. And yes, I'm going to be saying its full title each time I say it, as if I'm trying to fill a word count on a paper, because it's funny. Oh, I actually lied. McDonald's Treasureland Adventure was actually developed at the same time as Gunstar Heroes, and was finished before it. But Treasure wanted their first game to be a new IP, and, like, having the name of your company in the first game you make is kind of self-indulgent, don't you think? That's why McDonald's Treasureland Adventure actually released only 10 or so days after Gunstar Heroes in Japan, so technically, I'm covering their first game second, and their second game first. Oops. Anyways, let's get into it. I'll just say it straight up. The rumors are true, and McDonald's Treasureland Adventure is actually good. It is For sure a game for kids given what it's based on, and yes, quite an easy time. You play through 4 long stages as Ronald McDonald, using his famous attack of magic and scarf grappling hooks to move around. You go through bright and cheery locations, and even go to the moon at some point, in search of a lot of treasure, something Ronald McDonald is very famous for. Hey, maybe he's just trying to fund the Ronald McDonald houses. Yeah, that's why he's getting treasure. There actually isn't much connection to the McDonald's brand besides the characters. I'm guessing it's because this was developed in Japan, and McDonald's advertisements are probably way different there. No Hamburger Town or whatever it is. I don't know, I'm a zoomer. The only McDonald's lore I know is Grimace related. This actually includes McDonald's food products, which do not appear in the game at all, which makes it feel like you're not really being advertised to when you play this game. What also makes you not feel like you're being advertised to is that it's a pretty fun game. Of course, it's pretty easy, and the game is not a challenge, at all, but I think it knows this. It's very frequently introducing new level mechanics and obstacles whenever you play, and throwing a lot of stuff at you, which makes this game literally constantly feel fresh and fun. A licensed McDonald's game is obviously going to have to be very easy, so this game goes with it, and instead of prioritizing challenge, it prioritizes fun, while, of course, having enough to actually be functional as a game. Beginner is the default difficulty setting, by the way, so that's why all the footage you're seeing is in that setting. Well, of course, McDonald's Treasureland Adventure could have been like The Lion King, or any other stupidly difficult Genesis-era license game that exists solely to give stores more rental money, but it at least has some respect for the literal children that would be playing this. Speaking of children, the game also lets you spend gold you collect on lives or power-ups, and you can buy children. Oh, okay, I'm sorry, that wasn't even funny. Which means that new players, or literal children, it's easy to stock up on them and get a bunch. Those things said, McDonald's Treasureland Adventure is still a pretty simple and easy game, of course, and so it's really not the best game you could play. If you're into Treasure or Sega history, or even retro games or by God, McDonald's history, it's worth a playthrough, but otherwise, I'd say not really compared to other Genesis games, which definitely are. It's just not that deep of a game, which is 100% fine. I just don't think it's for everyone. That said, it does still have some things I haven't mentioned yet, like an emphasis on grappling onto hooks with Ronald's scarf, which can take some time to getting used to, because there's a bit of a delay between when the scarf actually can grab onto things and when you press the button, so it's pretty awkward when you have to use it. There are also bosses, and I can only think of the probably thousands of kids who have gotten stuck on these, not because they're actually hard, but because they're so confusing. You need to get hit by a certain attack to actually do damage to them, and it's kind of hard to get this at first, because it's not really explained and it's just kind of weird that that's a thing. So those are 2 flaws with the game, but I liked it a lot. And the fact that they did this in a licensed game, usually a type of game that tends to not end up good for a lack of care by the developers, it's just a dumb McDonald's game, shows genuine care from them. Getting commissioned to make a McDonald's game probably isn't the most glamorous job for any game developer, but at least they stuck with it, cared, and made the all-time greatest fast food game. I haven't played I Love You, Colonel Sanders, though, so maybe that takes the crown. I don't know. So, after the release of this game, Treasure was divided into 4 teams to develop the next 4 games we will be talking about today. And they were all developed at around the same time. The first one to release was in 1994, and is a game by the name of Dynamite Headdy, which, coincidentally, is also what your girl gets. There's something a little funny about Dynamite Headdy. You know how Treasure's aim was to make games that aren't really commercially viable, but are mainly what they want to make? Dynamite Headdy was meant to make money. Don't get me wrong, it has a lot of care put into it, but there were some decisions made in the game's development specifically to make dollar bills. Specifically Sega of America, who wanted Treasure to make the game more difficult in North America when it was being brought out there, when it was already quite a difficult game. Because if you have complete freedom to make whatever game you want, there's no rule to say you can't be a suck-up. I will be reviewing strictly the American version of the game, and, with this inflated difficulty, the fact that it's the American version of the game might come up a lot. Actually, difficulty is important enough that I'm going to have to bring it first. I'll say it straight. There are 9 long stages with multiple bosses in each, and if you die 3 times, you restart the game. No continues. Fuck you. Also, no mid-stage checkpoints. You get 2 continues in the Japanese version, but not this game. That's stupid. Congrats, Sega of USA. You ruined the game. If you play this in the modern day, you have to play with restore points, or just the Japanese version. You won't have too much fun otherwise unless you're a masochist. You might think it's not fair to review the American version since the Japanese version was technically the intended game, but Treasure voluntarily made the decision to make it harder, so I think it's perfectly fine. Okay, I don't want to get stuck on a difficulty for too long, because I was a bit exaggerated. The gameplay isn't ruined if you play on an emulator with restore points. Like I said before, you play through 9 stages, and you're playing as a puppet named Dynamite Headdy. Or I think he's just Headdy, I don't know. The whole game is themed around a theater, one big puppet show, and it is super charming. The backgrounds look bolted on, clouds are held up by wire, you fight bosses in a green room, and more. It's quite clearly not just some cynical cash grab. The treasure care is still there. Hey, that rhymes. It has the same kind of thing McDonald's Treasureland Adventure has, where there are a lot of mechanics in each level, and it's super fun as gameplay is shifting so much. And there are so many fresh new ideas, and you constantly get them. It's doubly cool when they all fit in the puppet show theme too. I think it's something Treasure does extremely well, and I hope to God it continues. Well, the next game is technically a fighting game, but after that, I guess. It's actually quite a polished game, and it's designed excellently. Donnie Headster's main ability is to attack by detaching his head Rayman style, and there's an emphasis on some grappling like McDonald's Treasureland Adventure, like with a grappling hook, but I've got to say, it's a lot more intuitive here without that delay, and it's used a lot better here too, so that's a plus for sure. The main system of power-ups is also pretty intuitive and satisfying. Most of them change your attacks, but some can give you projectiles or do stuff like make you small or give you a wall jump, which can allow you to choose different paths and just platform differently at times. It all adds depth to an already pretty cool game. There can also be a basketball minigame as a power-up, except that one was kind of lame. I didn't like it that much. Again, bosses are quite a big focus of the game. There's a little cherub thing, which conveniently tells you where to aim for some of them, so it avoids that confusing thing from McDonald's game for sure. That said, a focus on bosses, yeah, it was not for this game. Even in the Japanese version, you have limited lives before the game starts over again, and I feel the bosses in this game prioritize trial and error, and learning some attack patterns. I say that with hesitancy, however, as the bosses themselves are top tier. And that super cool theater theme comes into play in shaping the designs of these, and every single one is memorable and a great fight. Bosses are a highlight, even if them being so prevalent kinda left a bad taste in my mouth. Another, more baffling choice made in the American version is the fact that there's no dialogue at all. I can see why you'd remove it because it's a puppet show. Well, puppet shows do have talking, but, storytelling with no dialogue and all that. But still, why would you remove it? Are you too lazy to translate it? So yeah, the story is basically non-existent, which isn't that big a deal. It's just kind of WTF. I'm sure the manual had something about it, but I don't want to download a PDF for the manual of Dynamite Headdy on Sega Genesis. There is still text for the tutorials though, so that's fine, and the fact that there are tutorials in general and that they're optional is pretty cool and advanced for the time. There's also text at one point where this NPC defeats a boss for you. And that moment was the only thing I knew about Dynamite Headdy before starting this review. I knew that there was this one part where an NPC defeats a boss that was supposed to be there for you. When I heard that, I thought it sounded really cool. I thought it would have been like a rival or a villain or something, and this was a way to introduce how badass they are. But no, it was your girlfriend doing it. And the line was just that cherub saying, "Hey, Heather already defeated this boss for you." It wasn't as memorable as I thought it would be. But seriously, how cool would it be if they did that for like Mega Man? You enter a Robot Master arena and it's like, oops, Proto Man already defeated them. And then you could actually defeat them in the boss rush. Oh, that would be so cool. Anyways, it's actually easy enough to get the gist of Dynamite Headdy. And there isn't that much Headdy lore for Heady heads, so you're not missing that much without a story. It was pretty disappointing that Dynamite Headdy was this way. That sweet rental money was too tempting for Sega of America. They had to make Treasure do this. Because Dynamite Headdy is genuinely a great game, with excellent ideas, and a good expansion on what the company was doing before. If you're not opposed to placing some simple restore points at the beginning of each stage, which you really shouldn't, because why would you when it's just that, it's worth the playthrough. I like the game a lot, and screw you, Sega of America, for meddling in it. And whoever directed this game, you're not off the hook either for implementing it. Next up, this game actually released exactly 29 years from when I'm writing this, literally the exact day it released in 1994. The Japanese exclusive Yu Yu Hakusho Makyo Toitsusen. So technically a Mega Drive game. I'm going to be calling it Sunset Fighters or Yu Yu Hakusho Sunset Fighters because it actually released under that name in Brazil, and I'm not sure what Makyo Toitsusen actually means. Plus Sunset Fighters sounds cool, and even though it's like, what does that even have to do with Yu Yu Hakusho at all? So yeah, it's a 2D fighting game based on the Yu Yu Hakusho manga/anime series. I like 90s fighting games, a bit of Yu Yu Hakusho, and I guess I can say I like Treasure now. So I'm pretty excited for this one. Yu Yu Hakusho Sunset Fighters is based mostly around the Dark Tournament arc, and gives you a fairly sizable roster of 11 characters. Yusuke, Kuwabara, Kurama, Hiei, Elder Toguro, Younger Toguro, Genkai, Jin, Chu, Itsuki, and Shinobu Sensui. Stop watching after Dark Tournament, who dis? Now, just immediately when I look at footage, this ain't something I usually care about, but the game just looks like a Master System game. The graphics are not that good for the time. Stages have good themes, and I like the atmosphere they're going for, but they're only really passable at best. Character sprites are iffy, and the menus are just ugly. I only mention this because the other games developed by this company looked so good. And okay, now that I look at it, it's so noticeable that, I would have mentioned it otherwise. The combat is very slow and stiff, so it's a little bit awkward, and it takes some time to get used to. But I don't think that it's overall bad. There's a certain weight to attacks, and can be pretty satisfying if you're not too bothered by 90s fighting game jank. Especially because once you get used to it, it's actually a very easy game. You even have a dash which somewhat mitigates that slow pace, as you can just dash at your opponent. Also, if you're playing as Hiei, it is not slow-paced whatsoever. There are still some questionable decisions made in the combat department though. You don't automatically face your opponent, meaning if you walk in the other direction, you're not facing your opponent, and if you press the block button, it doesn't work, because you're blocking in the wrong direction. Also, there's only one round for each fight, making each round much shorter than other fighting games. It is kind of balanced by your characters being a bit tanky, and taking a lot of hits for your life bar to go down, but it's still kind of strange, and I think having multiple rounds makes the game feel like you have to apply your skills more consistently, giving you more of a need to actually be skilled and not just lucky. At least it sets it apart from some other fighting games at the time. Oh, and I couldn't find a place to mention it, but I just have to. If you beat the arcade mode, there's a rendition of the Yu Yu Hakusho opening theme, And that's rad, because that song's a bop. In terms of modes, there's only really an arcade and tournament mode, although it has a few things intended mostly for multiplayer, like a tag team mode, and the fact that you can play with up to 4 people on screen at the same time. You can do that in single player, but it's not that deep an experience aside from the novelty. I imagine it can provide a lot of fun with multiple people, though. Too bad I don't have any friends. Too bad I don't want to go through the hassle of connecting multiple controllers to my computer. That was probably the reason there's this Fatal Fury style mechanic where you can jump between the background and foreground and fight there. Except in that series, there's an attack specifically for attacking the opponent trying to escape your grasp. So without that, it feels less deep here. It was a good addition considering that 4-player thing though, and plus the chaos that can arise from that. Yu Yu Hakusho Sunset Fighters is, I'd say, like a B-tier 90s fighting game. No KOF or by God Street Fighter, but still a fun time. On the same level as, like, Fighter's History or something. And hey, that's pretty good. There's some jank and some decisions that make it its own weird little thing, but it never gets frustrating. Actually, the lack of difficulty and content, since remember, this was not an arcade game, it's probably what gets the closest to being considered frustrating to me. Similarly to McDonald's game, I would say play it if you're a big fan of Treasure, retro fighting games, or Yu Yu Hakusho, but otherwise meh. It's probably the weakest of these games so far. It is a little bit of a callback, or a successor, to Treasure's debut, Gunstar Heroes, as it's a run and gun as well, and has some elements. Only it's much more different in tone. I'm talking about Alien Soldier. In Alien Soldier, it's easy to get caught up in what you can't do. You can't take as much time as you want to do everything. You can't dive like Gunstar Heroes, and you can't even move while shooting. It took a long time for this game to click for me because of that. It felt quite limited and really difficult. But that was very rude of me to think, to neglect my best friend, the teleport ability. The two main movement options that set this game apart from other running guns is the fact that you can teleport, float in place, and even run upside down if you're on certain ceilings. All that definitely took some getting used to for me. Those aren't exactly orthodox abilities. But I'm glad I stuck with it, because this game was excellent, and a great companion game to Gunstar. Alien Soldier is essentially a boss rush game, since the stages are very small, and boss fights are most of what you are against. There's a solid 25 stages in total, so at 25 bosses, which take a lot of attempts, it's a pretty meaty game. Fun fact, the plan was originally to have 100 bosses, but that was scrapped, and, I admire the sheer amount of confidence in actually trying to think of doing that. Actually, a lot of Treasure's games, minus the Yu Yu Hakusho one and maybe McDonald's Treasure Land Adventure, have a lot of content in general. This format was a little tough to get used to, but I managed, and so should you. The thing is, though, the game defaults you on hard mode, which is not the ideal way to play. I'm sure, by my opinions of Dynamite Heady, you guys know how I feel about games that heavily emphasize bosses and have limited continues. And yeah, the hard mode doesn't here. So that was lame. Just play this game on easy mode. Well, it is technically not called easy though. It's called super easy. And hard mode is called super hard. Anyways, this format of mostly being a boss rush is a brilliant concept, and it's so cool to see the company continue to innovate while maintaining what makes it so good. There are a few types of guns you can use, and they are mostly pulled directly from Gunstar Heroes, only without the mix and match aspect. With how drastically different this game plays, it doesn't feel similar at all. The areas are smaller and of course shorter, and you engage with them in totally different ways. It's action-packed, but so much more concise and precise than something like Gunstar Heroes, but God knows, chaos has its place in this game as well. You can switch between each of your weapons,
And each weapon actually has limited ammo, another thing that might seem limited. So you might need to switch between them quite a lot. I actually didn't know you could switch between them, so when I first played it, I thought you were just screwed if you ran out of ammo in a boss fight. I am thankful that was not true. The game actually tells you all the controls, so that was just a skill issue, not really a game problem. I enjoy trying to find which weapon works best in each boss fight, and using that little bit of logic, except, well, most of the time, it's the flame power. The flame power makes short work of most of the bosses. A little cheap, but there's still a good challenge, even if you are making mincemeat of their health bars. It for sure should have been more balanced, though. The game has a relatively complex story, which is poorly translated and all told in one opening crawl. 90s games never change. The world is this kind of futuristic city, populated by aliens that are borderline Lovecraftian at times. The sprite design oozes with sci-fi 90s goodness, and it never gets old. Alien Soldier is probably the second best of all these games so far, besides Gunstar Heroes, but it's bordering on being the best. It's a really good game, and honestly, it's not even that hard. It's intense, but not really hard because it's pretty forgiving, and you get a lot of chances to retry bosses quickly and opportunities to switch up your style on the fly. If you are fine with games with a little bit of a learning curve, play Alien Soldier. It's worth it for sure. Also, like I said before, I am using an emulator to play these, but they are accessible on modern hardware through stuff like Genesis Online, Steam, and Sega Genesis Classics. So those are great opportunities to play these games. Unless you really want to play McDonald's Treasureland Adventure. Sorry, I don't think McDee's wants to preserve their old video games that much. Our next and final game will be, in true Treasure fashion, a huge genre change. It's an isometric action-adventure with RPG elements, Light Crusader. Light Crusader begins in a very cinematic way, with a cutscene interspersed with opening credits, just like the movies. We're introduced to our hero, Knight David. He serves Lord Frederick, and can we appreciate how those are actual names? They didn't just make stuff up. Anyways, Light Crusader is way more advanced to the point that it looks better than a Genesis game. The Sega Saturn had already released at this point, so it makes sense, but this is still just a really good-looking game. Like I said before, it's an isometric action-adventure, and it's actually in a similar vein to A Link to the Past. Only, as you can see, the angle is a bit different. Actually, there's a game called Crusader of Senti that's also seen as the Sega Genesis version of A Link to the Past, which I kind of want to play now. They also both have Crusader in their name. Light Crusader has an emphasis on very light puzzle solving in dungeons. So if you do like Zelda, you will like this, probably. The puzzles are definitely way simpler and aren't quite as intelligently designed or as intricate, but that's fine because they're not really the focus here. Mostly just a cog in the Light Crusader experience. Platforming is actually a big aspect of this game, and it's surprisingly not that bad. It does have its awkward moments, I mean, look at it. But it's actually not that frustrating, especially given you have that shadow under your character, and there actually is some depth perception. Depth perception does become an issue, though, in the action. It can be awkward to hit enemies, but this is also mitigated by the fact that normally you can jump and dive at them with your sword. There are also bosses, which are really imaginative and make use of David's moveset as well. It's not very Treasure-like in theory, but it feels so Treasure-like in practice. The bosses even have an emphasis on platforming, so yeah, that's really cool. I'm not actually the biggest fan of the dungeon crawl in games, because I feel they mostly just feel repetitive, but Light Crusader mostly avoids this by having design that's just fun. It prioritizes fun. I've been pretty general with this game compared to others, but that's because it's kind of simpler to understand. It's a dungeon-based action game with action, and it's done excellently.
I'm glad I was able to finish up this string of games with this one, which takes a huge change, but again, like, it stays true to what they are. If I had to rank each of the Treasure games now, I guess in order of weakest to best, Yu Yu Hakusho Sunset Fighters, McDonald's Treasureland Adventure, then Dynamite Headdy, then Light Crusader, and then Alien Soldier and Gunstar Heroes. But all were great, and just going through all of them were super fun. Treasure is a treasure to the games industry, and in their short time of making stuff for the Genesis, they made classic after classic, and I'm genuinely kind of wondering what the heck resulted in all of these games being so good when they had different directors. My idealized view of the company was slightly shaken up with that little Dynamite Heady gaff, but I'm gonna just forget about it. The point is, Treasure is just good. It makes really good games, and I'm so excited to see how the company will move forward in the future, and what other kind of games they'll make. I meant, like, in this series, because, like, the last game they made was in 2014. They are apparently working on a new one, though, so who knows. Funnily enough, I haven't actually talked about any shoot-'em-up games, which is a lot of what Treasure is known for, and it's a huge part of the Genesis library, but they haven't made any, which actually kind of goes to show how they don't really chase trends. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'll see you later, and I will maybe, possibly, probably, but probably not make a successor to this. Eventually.